Okay, so I went sideways on that video. I just worked in the GameObjectFind, and then I showed you how you can check if a variable exists or it doesn't. We can check if a game object is a null, or if we check if a game object exists, if it's not a null. I went off track a little bit. So we have the GameObjectFind. I'm going to bring in another example of how getComponent will break, just like GameObjectFind. So again, I'm going to create a new script for this. And this time it'll be my getComponent example. Just so you see it on screen, that was for the MPC. Alright, just clean that up. Alright, our getComponent example. So I had the scene, I saved it as a basic format, didn't I? Alright, so we have our MPC with no scripts on it. We have our player with no scripts on it. Now I'll show you what I'm doing just so you know where I'm heading. See the player, it doesn't have a rigid body component. Okay? The MPC does, but the player does not. So let's show an example of how, just like GameObjectFind, bit of recompilation going on there. Oh, I changed the name that was going. Our getComponent example. So I'll show you where, just like GameObjectFind can break, how getComponent can break. Let's just keep it simple now. So this is going to be on the MPC, so var target, and this is going to be of type transform. Let's try and put together everything that we've learnt so far. So target equals no, because we're going to look for the game object first, because we're splitting it up. So var target object, this will be of type game object, because we're looking for the game object first, and then we're going to split it up and get the transform. And this is going to equal game object dot find, and we're just going to look for the player, because this will be on our MPC. Now we're going to ask if target object, that's it, if we have a target object, if it's not equal to null. If target object, then we're going to grab the transform. The target is going to equal this target game object's transform. Okay, so there's our first check to see if nothing breaks. So we had an else down here. Debug log no target game object found. Alright, now we're pretty happy we have a player in the scene, so this is just, for future. If we ever put this script on anything else and we don't have a player in the scene, the script is going to tell us straight up. We know where it's breaking. Okay, so if we have a target object, we've grabbed the transform. Now let's look at that getComponent. Let's give myself plenty of space. Let's create a local variable for this var. Let's just say the target rigid body. And this will be of type rigid body, because that's what we think we're trying to get. Yep. And this is going to equal, okay, we have our target, and we're just going to ask getComponent, and we're looking for the rigid body. Now let's just try and do something to that, so I can improve this with the getComponent. Alright, let's just set the velocity. The target rigid body's velocity equals, let's just say vector 3 up. So we think, by writing this script, we think that we're going to find the player, then we're going to grab its transform, and then we're going to store a reference to its rigid body. And we're going to try and get component. We're going to try and get that rigid body component. And then, without even checking if that exists or not, we're just going to try and set its velocity. So let Unity compile that. Now, I haven't attached that script to anything yet, so we're going to put this on the MPC. So where's my get component? Onto the MPC, and we are looking for our player. Let's just hit play. And there it is again. There we have that null reference exception. But hang on, we checked to make sure if we found the game object or not. Yes, we did. But then we tried to grab a component off it and then immediately access it. Let me highlight that again. Okay? So we tried to get component, and then we tried to do something to that component. And now Unity is telling us, no, it's not happening. I can't set the velocity of a null. So there's using get component, but having the same error because we're trying to deal with something that is a null. So again, if you're falling into this condition, you would check if so we've just tried to grab our rigid body component, which doesn't exist. So we're saying if this is not a null, if we have our target rigid body, if we've gotten component and this has happily been assigned. Let's just do one more debug. Let's just do a debug. Log warning. No rigid body component on that transform. So again, just trying to cement in the idea of checking our variables if they're not a null, and then letting ourselves know, rather than just seeing null reference exception error and not understanding where it is or where it's coming from. So let's just run, I've done it again. Let's just run that one more time and see if we can understand what's going on. There we have it. We didn't get an error because we did a check for it. Let's just check on that. Okay, so there's the same principle again. Okay, hopefully in all that I've cleared up null reference exception error, because that's one of the main ones. What is a null? A null means it doesn't exist. It's empty space. It's a void. It's a vacuum. There is absolutely nothing there. Okay? And we can just check for ourselves if something exists before we try and do something to it. And then we can let ourselves know. Alright, so that's game object find and get component.